light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lynn Scott Hagerman podcast, where truth has no filter, freedom is our mission, and God's light exposes every work of darkness. Praise God. I am your host, Lynn Scott Hagerman, survivor of child trafficking and government experimentation underground in conjunction with our U.S. university medical system, in conjunction with our government also, through the MK Ultra mind control programming. I am the voice they tried to silence, and I am silent no more. Praise God. Today, I'm also a child of God, a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, and a friend of Holy Spirit, standing strong before you today in mind, body, and spirit. My calling from the Lord is clear, folks. Expose corruption hidden in darkness, elevate whistleblowers, reveal the truth, restore these broken lives, protect the little ones, and equip others for the spiritual warfare and the battles that we face today. This broadcast airs Tuesday through Friday, as well as Sunday at 2 o'clock Central Time on the platform you're watching from. We are streaming to YouTube today. I do have many topics that can't be streamed to YouTube because of the lack of First Amendment on that platform, but today we'll be fine there. Today, I'm also an international award-winning human resource consultant. That's my day job. And I'm also a marathoner and a weightlifter. Please be sure to visit qgrit.org. That's the letter Q, the word grit, GRIT.org. That's God's plan for the aftercare of the little ones once they're rescued from above ground and below ground trafficking, as well as to help survivors of any type of trauma. Also, be sure to visit liveyoungerwithlynn.com, L-Y-N-N-E, liveyoungerwithlynn.com. Because of trauma, the Lord pointed me to the LifeWave technology, which just won the Stem Cell Innovator of the Year award. And one is one of Inc. magazine's fastest growing companies in the world. Also, it's been honored with actually for several years. I have people ask me all the time, how can I sit here as a sane, rational woman that you see before you? And I list all of the things that the Lord brought to me for my healing on the qgrit.org website. One of them is the LifeWave technology that decreased the PTSD and anxiety by 70%. And although I can't guarantee it, statistically, so far 100% of the people who have joined me and who I helped with the technology have had relief from those symptoms. Praise God. And today I want to say something before I get a bunch of comments in the chat and emails. So you will see I have patched my neck all over the place. And the reason why is yesterday, out of the blue, I had a lymph node swell up huge. It started closing my throat completely down. And I realized somehow I had gotten strep during this holiday season. And I can't lose my voice because I need to be doing my broadcast for the Lord and for you. And so I put the X39 patch on. I put the glutathione patch, which is an immune building system, and the Eon patch, which is anti-anxiety. Took the swelling right down and opened up my throat so I could breathe and speak. And so I'm not moving these during the show. So you're going to see I'm a bit swollen. I just wanted to explain that before we jumped into today, because I know I'm going to get a lot of comments. And yes, I appreciate your prayers. Praise God, and thank you very, very much. And so let's just continue to bring everything and every topic into the light and presence of the Lord God Almighty. Today's episode, we are going to expose a truth that most Americans simply do not know: how China quietly took control of Hollywood, our entertainment, and even our cultural narrative. My guest, Chris Fenton, spent 17 years behind closed doors, negotiating with Beijing and watching this takeover in real time. What you're about to hear is shocking, and it's urgent, and it's absolutely critical for America's future. Welcome, Chris. It's such an honor and a blessing to have you on today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a blessing to be here.
You are very, very welcome. Before we jump into the topic, which we've had hundreds of people waiting, the numbers are growing rapidly on social media, all platforms. I'd like you to tell people a bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. My background, I'm born and raised in South Florida. I went to high school in Connecticut because my father was an engineer for Pratt& Whitney Aircraft and got transferred up there. So I went to a large public school in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and graduated there. Went on to get an engineering degree from Cornell University up in Ithaca, New York. And I graduated in 1993. The economy was not very good. I also wasn't the greatest student. I sort of had a C plus, B minus average, and wasn't offered a bunch of jobs coming out of school. So I spent the next roughly 9 months traveling the country and staying at my fraternity house across the way. I think I'd visited 60 something cities or towns and was looking for what I wanted to go do. And eventually I happened to visit a friend in Los Angeles, sort of fell in love with what you see in the background there. That's the
Yes.
Pacific Ocean. And it was 72 and sunny and beautiful. And they actually had a business here that was thriving among a pretty recessioned overall economy called the Hollywood entertainment business. And they were calling it the Wall Street of the 90s. So I said, well, that sounds like an opportunity. How do I get in? Found myself in the mailroom at the largest agency in the world called the William Morris Agency. It's now called Endeavor, so it's changed ownership over the years, and learned the wax on, wax off of delivering mail to everybody in music departments, sports, commercials, television, film, you name it, and worked my way up, grinding along the way, and eventually became an agent representing motion picture writer, directors, actors, producers, and investors, and did that for a whole decade. And then the real story that you probably want to dive into was after that, because after that decade, I then started my own boutique agency with another partner, a guy named Walter Hamada. And we were really successful on a boutique level, doing essentially what I was doing at William Morris. And that caught the attention of China. And I started doing some business with some Chinese individuals over there that were looking to use Chinese RMB to start financing global English language movies that moved forward in progress. And eventually they decided they wanted to buy the company that I had started. And that's really when the journey starts.
That's amazing in itself. And I admire your work ethic. I admire people who start at the bottom and work their way up to these enormous levels of success that you have even today. Only in America, Chris. This is like you are the epitome of the American dream. And I think that's amazing that your dream led you in connection with China. So what happened next?
Well, the Chinese, it took a while because I wasn't specifically looking to work directly with the other superpower, nor did I know much about it, but I had made a couple trips over there and it looked like there was a huge opportunity to have a very strong career, successful career. In fact, one time I visited, and I think the year was 2000, they called the national bird the crane, meaning that all you saw over there were construction cranes. You had to wear a hard hat everywhere. Everything was literally under construction, and it looked like opportunity was abundant. So over time, they eventually offered a deal that I couldn't refuse. And I ended up running all their international business and putting all of their international partners and coordinating all the international business that we were doing inside of China with international partners. That was my job, essentially running that all. And what that business entailed was everything from the commercial business to we had clients such as Nike or Under Armour, Johnson and Johnson. We also had, and athlete representation business coming out of the 2008 Olympics. So we had athletes like Michael Phelps in swimming and Kobe Bryant in basketball. We worked with the Chinese NBA version of the NBA and also the NBA. And then eventually started distributing movies, and we got really good at it. We were distributing movies in that country that never would have gotten in without us. We were generating income, bringing that income back from China into the US, and we were raising a lot of eyebrows. And then eventually we started financing and producing movies with the biggest studios in Hollywood, including Disney, Paramount, Warner's, etc. So that's the macro overview of what occurred, and that's where we can sort of get into the nitty-gritty that your audience probably wants to hear about.
Yeah, so I am ready for the nitty-gritty. So you are involved, deeply involved, highly successful, helping others to be highly successful between the two nations. And then you started, I'm going to just call it seeing the underbelly of what was actually going on. So tell us what started happening.
Well, that would cut forward to probably 2019, but that's looking back at some of the stuff that we should probably cover. For instance, one of the things that was obvious in terms of US-China engagement on the capitalism level was that we all saw huge opportunities to have great, successful careers, being sort of pioneers in that space. But on top of it, we all believed in this mission that was presented mainly out of 1971, the initial meeting between China and Kissinger and Nixon. And that was when Nixon and Kissinger said, hey, we need to essentially start working with this sleeping dragon, this dragon that we have had no relationship with up until 71, thanks to the Korean Peninsula War and various other things. They were communist as of 1949. And they felt like if we open that market up to the commercial products and services that we make here in the United States of America, we could eventually make China just like us. So there was this idea since 1971 and into 1979, when we really had a trade relationship kickstarted, and then the WTO induction in 2001, where the more products and services we got into that market, no matter what it took to get them in there, meant more jobs here in America, better increased GDP, and spreading the aspirational quality of democracy inside of a communist country, so that cut to by, say, 2025, China would be a Western democracy just like us. That didn't exactly work out that way.
No, it did not, not remotely.
So, yeah. So if you look back at a lot of the stuff that I was involved in, and I talk about it quite a bit in the book, we were involved in things that we thought were carrying out that important mission. But in a way, we were actually, for instance, teaching a country that said, hey, you can sell our fish here, but in order to sell your fish here in this market, you need to teach us how to fish for ourselves. So if you look at the Chinese film industry, when I was doing movies such as the Point Break remake, Looper, Iron Man 3, Johnny Depp movies, whatever it was, right? They had a market that couldn't make their own films for their own people. In fact, Hollywood was representing roughly 80 cents of every dollar that was made in the box office there. Wow. When you cut to today, the only movies other than Zootopia 2, which is a really recent sort of aberration, other than that, we're representing about 5% of every dollar that comes in. They essentially learn from us because they forced us to teach them how to do films at a world-class level so that they could do it themselves. And essentially the whole game was for them to learn how to do it themselves and kick us out of the market, which they pretty much have almost done. And that's a rinse and repeat effort and model, and essentially nefarious agenda by Beijing across all industries, whether it's the car industry, whether it's the shoe industry, whether it's the NBA, whether it's hotels, whether it's computer semiconductor chips, you name it. They want to learn our process, master it, and then kick our international companies out, our American companies out, and replace them with domestic industries.
And from your position, you would have seen this, I'm sure, not only in your industry, but in these other industries also, since you were in China quite a bit. And I'm sure rubbing elbows with people from all kinds of industries, starting businesses in China. And of course, we've heard, in the United States, so many companies had to give up patents and all kinds of private knowledge and trade secrets in order to earn income from China. And I mean, it shocks me that just in your industry alone, when this started, 80 cents on the dollar went to the United States, and now it's 5 cents. That's shocking.
Yeah, it's definitely shocking. In fact, it's a lot of times people, and we were talking this prior to the show, people think it's sort of a niche problem. This US-China relationship, it doesn't affect me. It's another superpower on the other side of the world. We're not at war with them or whatever it is. And it's very important to me to try to scale who I'm talking to about this issue. And I was talking about this podcast that my wife and I do called Plate and Ponder Empty Nesting with Jen and Chris Fenton. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcasts. It's called Plate and Ponder Empty Nesting. And what we do on that show is it's just 35 minutes, 3 times a week. But we discuss various sort of news headlines that are fun to talk about. But I also try to interlace a couple US-China issues in there too, in a fun and engaging way, just so people start to realize how many touch points there are. For instance, this TikTok issue, right?
Yes.
TikTok is utilized by the majority of Americans under 40 for all news and information. China controls the algorithm on that. So they can essentially throttle any sort of news and information that they don't want people to engage in, and they can amplify the stuff that they do. So imagine an election, right? If there's a gaffe by a particular candidate, they can easily have what they call their 50-cent army, which is 2 million PLA soldiers that are in charge of hacking systems around the world and putting out social media and all that kind of stuff. If they want to show that fumbling and bumbling moment of Donald Trump or of Joe Biden or of Kamala Harris, whoever they're trying to get behind or get people animatedly talking about them negatively or whatever, they can do it. They can put it up on TikTok and they can blast it out there. And say the opposite side of the equation, there's somebody that gaffes, whether, it was Biden or Trump or Kamala or whatever, they can throttle that from circulating. So that under 40 group might not even be aware of one gaffe, but might be totally consumed by another. We saw it with hashtags and the amplification of Israeli conflict with Gaza and the amount of pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas TikTok videos out there that were trying to get sympathy for that side versus sympathy videos for the Israeli side. The hashtag differences were massive. And the way you were able to control or look at a controlled sort of study of what those hashtags were versus TikTok is you could look at the same type of messaging on Instagram or Facebook, which are obviously American controlled, or on YouTube, and you would see a completely different throttling and amplification that was going on that was arguably way more natural in sort of the way the tenor was versus the way TikTok was dictating it. So now cut to today where we're selling them H200 NVIDIA chips. We've just decided to do that. So that's only going to accelerate their ability to create AI and move their AI race against us that much faster, amplify the speed that they're moving that whole development forward on. Now, imagine if you own TikTok, you control TikTok, and you're able to AI generate, say, I don't know, a white policeman shooting a black unarmed civilian in the back that looks completely like white supremacist versus a completely innocent person. Imagine you amplify that constantly on TikTok, so under 40-year-olds see it. Imagine the type of rancor, the type of chaos, the type of rioting you could actually create by putting something like that out there and making it the number one thing for a series of days. That's how nefarious and pernicious this Beijing control over a platform of information and news is. And that's why the most bipartisan vote in recent history in Congress almost unanimously voted, both Democrats and Republicans, to ban TikTok almost 2 years ago, this upcoming February. Yet we still have this thing lingering and being used by under 40-year-olds and by corporations that are trying to reach those under 40-year-olds. It's something that we need to stop. We need to get rid of this thing as quickly as possible. And almost every expert on earth would say the exact same thing.
So, Chris, I am trying to wrap my mind around everything that you just said, because the way that you explain it in everyday language for we the people, I greatly appreciate. And I'm shocked as you explain it like that we still do have TikTok in the United States. I can see where China is greatly influencing our election results, since the majority of people under 40 get their news from TikTok, and China determines what the news is. I'm trying to envision 2 million PLA soldiers behind a lot of the content that gets pushed forth. And I have to tell you, I'm rather shocked that this didn't go through in February last year. What is stopped? This is such a horrific infiltration into the United States. What is stopping TikTok from being banned?
Well, it's and I voted for him, President Trump, but President Trump has extended the deadline to cut it out of the American territory. So you had the vote, the congressional vote, then it went through the Senate. The Senate almost unanimously voted to ban, and it's essentially banning the platform as long as Beijing has any sort of control over both the data and the algorithm. So that those two passages occurred, and then it went to the executive branch where Biden signed it into law. Then as of January, it was supposed to be disappeared from the US because there were no alternatives to get it out of Beijing's hands. And President Trump decided to extend that period to see if there was ways to create a deal that would satisfy the laws that are in the book and also get through on Xi Jinping. Now, granted, there's a lot of things that President Trump has done that I'm very happy he has done. This is one where it's a head scratcher for so many people. Now, there are massive private equity firms that are involved in ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, as well as TikTok itself. And a lot of them have been lobbying the heck out of President Trump in the White House to keep TikTok alive here in the United States of America, because it signifies so much extra value having it involved here in the US, and it diminishes its value drastically if it's not. So that lobbying effort has kept it alive and has essentially allowed the circumvention of laws that of bills that have been signed into laws over a year ago.
So, what are some things specifically in this area? Because I love to give the people listening tools. Number one, of course, I'm putting this out to my prayer warriors in the audience to call on the Lord, because Hosea, I think it's Hosea 3, my people perish for lack of knowledge. And so now we have the knowledge, folks. So I'm asking my prayer warriors to pray this down so that way we the people can be successful. And then in addition to prayer, which of course is our most powerful tool, but Chris, what about boots on the ground? Because scripture also says prayer without works, faith without works is dead. So we need some works here too. So what can we the people do to help move this through? Because the solution would be a US based corporation, or maybe the government. But I'm very anti-government doing much of anything because they seem to foul everything up that they touch. But what are some action steps that we, the people, can do to help in this TikTok problem?
Well, the action steps are just to to push and influence the what has already been passed in a law to be upheld, and to remind the White House and various other, you know, parties that are involved in keeping the extension of the deadline of banning TikTok from the United States from continuing, to remind them that patriotism is much more important than capitalism. Because without patriotism, you're not protecting the foundation of what allows us to have free market capitalism. If we allow the infiltration of propaganda and soft power messaging, news and information that's controlled by one of our four foreign adversaries, there's four foreign adversaries as defined by the US government and the Pentagon: Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China. I can pretty much guarantee if TikTok were a North Korean platform, we would not have it here. Russia,
Yes.
too. I would say also Iranian. So why is it still allowed? The only reason is because we're putting reckless capitalism in front of patriotism. And the long-term ramifications of doing that are going to weaken the foundation of what makes this republic so strong. And also the ability to actually be capitalists the way that this republic allows us to do it. We will become more and more like China. And there's plenty of examples of how China is already dictating the way we operate as capitalists, not just in the TikTok space, not just in the Hollywood space, but across the board. I mean, if you look at hotels, for instance, they can't actually put on their website that they have a hotel in a country called Taiwan. It has to be part of China. Taipei has to be seen as a part of China on their website. The same with airlines. Our investment banks and banking systems, they're not allowed to do due diligence on assets, wealth assets, or investment opportunities in China if they were going to say that they're too risky to invest in, or if they're going to rate them at something lower than investment grade. China wants to make sure that everything is seen as hunky-dory and investable. And if you go against that, you'll have your offices on the ground raided there. You might have some of your executives detained. And on top of it, you'll get banned from doing any business in that market forever. So all of this adds up to China is trying to dictate the way the rest of the world not only sees that market, sees that system of government, sees the way they operate as being the best version of a system, the best version of behavior. But on top of it, they really want to dictate the way that we understand what China is today, what their system is today, and the perfection that is created by that system of law. So it's a, you know, the best way to think about it, because you know, I don't know your age, but I'll age myself here. So growing up, if anybody asked me about the Soviet Union, I would immediately think of gray skies, of rainy days, snow, sleet, miserable people, alcoholics, KGB spies, lots of miserable people. If somebody asked me about the Soviet Union or Russia today, I still immediately go to that space, right? China, when we shoot a movie, you're not allowed to show gray skies. You're not allowed to show smog. You're not allowed to show criminal activity that the police don't catch. You're not allowed to show dirty laundry hanging from clotheslines in a city. You're only allowed to show blue skies. You're only allowed to show people having fun, enjoying themselves, living in gleaming cities and skyscrapers and bridges that span 2,500 feet in the air and connect two mountains that were built in a month. That's the only thing you're allowed to show. So over time, that type of visual that my kids have had, not only since the day they were born, but for the next 18 years on top of it, by the time they're 36, you go, hey, what do you think of China? They're going to go, oh my God, like that system seems to be great. Everybody's happy over there. There's these incredible malls. They got anything they want as consumers. They have incredible weather. They have beautiful infrastructure and high-speed trains and bridges, and everything's perfect. That's the way they're going to see it. They're not going to see the Gorky Park Soviet Union version of what I remember, say, Russia, Soviet Union as growing up.
I just, every time you share more information, Chris, I'm shocked and trying to wrap my mind around it, because I think about we have a severe problem with communist Marxist infiltration in the United States throughout all of our systems. And when you add this to it, no, this is one of the many reasons why our youth, for example, coming out of college can be so pro-communism, whenever you and I know that that's a terrible system, absolutely terrible system. You know, the truth of, like China with their digital credit scores now, you know, in our alternative social media, we've seen homeless people now because they didn't perform socially the way China wanted them to, and locked them out of all their money. And we saw people laying in streets because of that. And so it appalls me that, for example, Hollywood is, in just one of many avenues, is required to show everything so amazing whenever we know that that is not the case. I can remember a time when one of their trains derailed and a lot of people were buried alive, and China left the people there because they didn't want anything on the surface to tar their reputation, and they didn't want any cleanup or any negativity being seen. It's horrific what they do to their people because they're a communist nation. And I'm sitting here trying to picture too, like, so if let's say XYZ company is a famous worldwide hotel and they're called XYZ company. So if they have an office in China, then they have to, in all of their social media, if they advertise China, it has to all be positive and wonderful and everything's great, or they could be harmed at their offices in China. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, you have to portray China in a way that Beijing mandates China is portrayed. Um, it's not just in terms of, you know, that office per se. It would be in terms of, do you ever want that hotel chain to have any sort of market penetration inside of China or inside of Taiwan? They can even actually push that agenda against certain companies where they might be able to put pressure on some of their allied countries or markets that are so dependent on them to say, we don't want you working with that company Thailand. We don't want you working with that company Cambodia or whatever it is, right? There's the ability for them to push influence, not just within their borders, but with outside of it too.
I'm sitting here thinking about the United States. I recently read on social media, so I live in Missouri, and we have an Air Force base here, Fort Hood, and it is recently it was talked about how there's a Chinese nationals who own I'm gonna put in air quotes, a campground right next to the Air Force base. And I find that astounding. And we're here because I'm going to go, you know, conspiracy, that word was coined by the CIA after the Kennedy assassination. And so we all know how that word came to be. I'm proud to wear that as a badge of honor myself when I say it. But there's no coincidences that Chinese nationals own land right next to a military base. And we find that that's true in several places in the United States. What's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously there's always a chance that there is an innocent, just sort of coincidental situation, but for the most part, and I wouldn't call it conspiracy because we've caught the Chinese operatives doing things over and over again, whether it's, you know, infiltrating universities here, infiltrating, you know, certain military bases, whether they've been involved with a variety of different things that are carrying out Beijing's objectives. We've caught them in almost every situation.
Exactly.
It's, this isn't an issue with, say, Chinese people or China in general, right? Like I have plenty of friends that are Chinese, that are both
Sure.
Chinese national and
Yep,
Chinese people here in the US.
I do too.
We have a problem with the system of government that's there. We have a problem with Beijing. And the average Chinese person shouldn't have an issue with you or me. They have issues with Washington D.C. and the way Washington D.C. operates in terms of China.
Exactly.
So the Chinese national that happens to be here on the ground in the U.S. may be a very ethical, moral, good, trustworthy person overall. You might have a very good friendship with them, but they always have to be prioritizing what Beijing wants them to do, not want them to do. The way that they operate here in the US, they always have to be cognizant of Beijing's watch. And the reason for that is maybe they're here in the US, but they might not be able to stay here, or they have family that are still in China. They have friends that are still in China that could be in jeopardy if there's ever an issue with something that they do overseas. I've spoken at universities before about the very thing that we're talking about here. And I've had assistant deans call me afterwards saying that we had complaints from Chinese individuals about some of the things that I was talking about. And they were concerned that just by being in the class, that they were in jeopardy, or their family back in China was in jeopardy, because they're all supposed to be watching each other and making sure that they're all applying what Beijing's mandate is wherever they are around the world.
That is shocking that it goes to that level. I have heard, and I don't even know if it's true or not, but that whenever a certain number of Chinese nationals are in an area, that they are to get together and make sure that whatever Beijing wants is pushed through wherever they're at in a community. I'm not sure if that's accurate. Have you heard about that?
I haven't heard about that, but I can tell you that there is definitely, especially on college campuses, there are definitely individuals that are keeping an eye out for on other individuals, and those individuals have reported Chinese nationals that say maybe have gotten a little too critical about Beijing, or have said things that are opposite what Beijing wants them to say, or, for instance, even get behind, starting to understand more about the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, 1989, and perhaps are caught looking at photographs of the tank man, sitting in the middle of the street in front of those tanks. What's interesting is that, and it's changed obviously over time just because of VPN and various other things that are very hard to firewall from the youth today. But when I was in college, and if you had a Chinese national on campus and you showed them a picture of the tank man, they wouldn't know what that was. And that was the case for many years after 1989. Most young Chinese, particularly ones born after 1989, never saw that photo.
That's astounding. When you talk about the universities, you have many amazing articles on your website about Feeding the Dragon website. I have it scrolling across the screen, but I can't remember. What's the exact name of your website, Chris?
Feedingthedragonbook.com.
Okay, many amazing articles that you've written, and one of them was about tuition for Chinese nationals versus others. So while the university topics come up, I would love for you to share insight on that.
Yeah, well, I am a professor at University of Southern California, which happens to be a private institution that has a very large international population of students. I think we're roughly 27%, something like that, which is very high. You know, I'm pro-American students. I know a lot of kids who have applied to USC that I felt should have been given a slot there to go to. The same could be said about Ivy League schools and various other tough schools to get into. Um, we pay a lot as taxpayers into this higher education system, maybe not directly, but through nonprofit status, through land grants, through various essentially taxpayer based donations and various other 0% loans, et cetera. All of that adds up over time. So if you have a kid, by the time they're 18, you could pretty much look at your family and go, oh, well, we probably contributed X amount of money to the higher education system. Yet we have to compete with international students to get our kids into those slots. I think having some international presence at these schools is good. It's a good way for our kids to have a cosmopolitan global outlook on the world. But to take too many slots from Americans is a disservice. Now, if you do decide as a school that you want to take a lot of slots, we should at least have a reciprocal tuition definition for out of country students. So a lot of the arguments around, well, we need international students because they pay full freight. Well, there's a lot of Americans that pay full freight too, but full freight isn't what Americans pay to go, say, to a university overseas. My son goes to McGill University in Montreal. He pays 13 times as much money as a full freight Canadian student from Quebec.
Wow.
What would happen if we had, say, Chinese students pay 13 times what a full freight student at UCLA or USC would pay? That would be an interesting version of trying to figure out how to solve this problem, because at least in that situation, if you're going to take slots from Americans, maybe you can at least have the money, the extra income that's coming in from those people taking those slots, allow that extra income to trickle down to lower tuition for the American students that did get slots there. That's something that I think we really need to look at, because the way it costs so much more for an American to go study at Oxford or Cambridge or, Sorbonne University in France or Singapore or Australia, we need to price our premium education system here in the United States properly.
With the U.S. based, because I had not heard this topic before, with the U.S. based universities, is do foreign nationals from other nations pay more than U.S. citizens, or is it all nations that their foreign nationals that come into our universities pay lower? I mean, are we charging any nations like 13 times what a U.S. citizen pays? Do we do that at all?
No, we don't differentiate by what nation they're from. It's just international students. And it's harder for international students to get any sort of merit-based financial aid or financial aid overall, although there's plenty of charts that go around that show how much financial aid private institutions have been giving international students. So there a lot of cases aren't paying full freight, which was always this argument that, well, we can't afford to keep the colleges open if we don't have full freight students. So there's a lot of international students not even paying full freight, but the ones that do pay full freight are probably outnumbered by the American students that are paying full freight. But the reality is they shouldn't even be paying full freight. We're not pricing the premium education experience that they're coming here for right. We could price it much higher. And in fact, we should price it much higher, not only to make it beneficial for the American students that are at these schools to have a decrease in their tuition costs, but on top of it, it only makes it fair considering the fact that as taxpayers, we've been paying into a taxpayer basis this ability for these schools to have all kinds of taxpayer subsidized ways of their economics working out, like I said, through land grants, through nonprofit status, et cetera.
Speaking of trying to earn more money, tariffs. You also talk about the border security and tariffs, and had an amazing article again on your website. I encourage everyone to go to feedingthedragonbook.com, because you'll see a lot of amazing articles. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, and it's actually something that we've talked about on Plate and Ponder Empty Nesting, the
Oh,
podcast, because if you look at like tariffs are very hard to understand in a way versus say border policy. So a border has a very tangible aspect, right? The border has a wall or it has people guarding it, and you're either letting people in or you're not. Now, one reason why, and it's been very weird how it's all shifted politically, but the Republican side of the aisle used to be very pro immigration, pro getting in as many people as possible because there was this push to have them in agricultural industries or various other industries where it was hard to get very low priced labor. So that influx of immigration was great for business, which was a big, obviously, side of the conservative side of the aisle. Now, obviously, that's flipped. So the Democrats now are very pro open border. But that border, when you think about it, was really about halting low wage workers from coming into the country and replacing American labor with really cheap alternatives. In fact, the unions, the Teamsters and everybody else, which are on the Democrat side of the aisle, typically were very anti-immigration too, because that would cause real problems for their union members, in terms of keeping jobs, holding jobs, or getting jobs, because this influx of cheap labor was coming in. Tariffs are essentially the same thing. So if you have a closed border, you're protecting the American market from very underpriced labor. Okay. If you set up that border so that that underpriced labor doesn't come into the country, you have to hire higher priced Americans for those jobs, union jobs, whatever it is. It costs more. So what did companies do to combat that? They were like, hey, you know what? We don't want to hire Americans here. We don't want to pay that extra cost. So let's just move our factories, move our manufacturing to where the low cost labor is. That's what they did. They just hopped their factories over the wall, the border wall that we created. So when that happens, you decimate all kinds of different countries, all kinds of states and villages and towns and cities, because you're moving the manufacturing complex overseas. Tariffs are essentially the same thing, I think, as a border wall. It's essentially saying, okay, if you want to move your manufacturing overseas to get that cheap labor, we're going to build a border wall. It's called a tariff. And we're going to make it 15 feet high, which means we're going to charge you 15% to get your products over the wall and back into this country that you're making overseas. In some cases, you might want to make a 30-foot wall, which is a 30% tariff. Make it that much harder to get your product and services back into the US market. If you make that border wall high enough, meaning the percentage of the tariff is high enough that it offsets the savings of that low cost labor you're finding overseas with the American labor that's here in this country that needs the work.
That's right.
Then suddenly you're going to move those factories back. So it's literally the same exact dynamic as a border dynamic. And it's harder to sort of visualize because it's not like a border wall, but it works the same way. And that's why I've been very pro tariff.
Well, and when we come back, folks, we're going to play a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk about SCOTUS's role in these tariffs. So we'll be right back.
A life empowered is closer than you think. We're all looking for a better way. Reimagine what's next with a new sense of exuberance. Why not power on like you mean it? Or power off blissfully? A better sleep is a better awake. You've never moved like this before. With the energy nature intended. Imagine reprogramming the way you look at the speed of science, at longevity, at exhilaration. It's next level rejuvenation. Take control of your well-being from the inside out and outside in. The light within is ready to ignite. Be the light. LifeWave.
Please visit liveyoungerwithlynn.com for the product that won the Stem Cell Innovator of the Year award. It is the wearable medbed, folks. So, Chris, I have been watching in social media for a while now our Supreme Court and this tariffs topic. So, weigh in on what on earth is happening there.
Well, the Supreme Court is just simply making decisions based on whether the executive branch has the power to implement tariffs or not, or whether it's a congressional move or various other parties that need to be involved in that decision making. So we're finding out whether or not Trump has that authority and whether that authority is going to be upheld.
And what is your opinion on how that might shake out?
Well, my opinion is that it seems if you're going to get anything done in any sort of efficient manner, the more power the executive branch has, the better chance you have of accomplishing quick and efficient policy changes. And that's mainly because Congress is it's a messy process, and it seems to be very ineffective in getting anything done. And it's essentially just a big obstacle to progress in most cases. But at the same token, it's also an obstacle to, the ability for one branch of government to call all the shots and essentially concentrate power into something that our founding fathers would have never supported. So SCOTUS, I think, does have a difficult decision to make based on the laws that are in the books and applying what they think is what those laws were intended for. And then on top of it, describing sort of areas that maybe those laws don't cover and figuring out how they would cover if the founding fathers or whatever those laws were designed for actually took into a consideration something that's happening in today's world. So it's no easy task. And quite frankly, if you didn't vote for President Trump, you're probably really hoping that the White House does not have the authority to do some of this stuff. If you voted for him, you're hoping they do. But then at the same token, I'm looking at it going, I don't like this unrestrained power of the White House either, mainly because there's certain things that I think they're making impulse decisions on that no one's really critically taking a look at, and they're getting implemented, and they're to the detriment of the long-term health of the United States of America. The NVIDIA chip, policy change the other day is one of those examples.
I'm hopeful that at some level, somehow, we do get a lot of these tariffs approved, because I see it from a businesswoman's standpoint of the revenue that would be generated for the government and take a bit of load off we the people. But speaking of President Trump too, that's another interesting story with your background. You were a lifelong Democrat and then decided to vote for President Trump. I'm not sure if it was both terms or beginning the second term. So tell me about that.
Yeah, it was just it was the second term, although I had thought about it a little bit first term, but the second term was where I made that decision. Part of that was there were certain things that I liked about the way he was looking at problems that needed to get addressed. And a lot of those problems were actually Democrat sided issues that we supported efforts to curb back, say, in the 1990s. I mean, a non-open border, a real strong border policy was a Democrat ideal for centuries, mainly to protect American labor, protect American unions. I also was very into this idea of getting out of foreign wars as quickly as possible. That's something that obviously the Democrat side of the aisle had always been a part of. I was very much into women's rights. Having a daughter and being married to a woman, women's rights are important to me. And when you see certain sporting events in iffy areas where it seems like women's rights aren't protected,
That's
that's a
right.
I also like the idea of unrestrained free speech, and I think as a lot of disclosure started to occur around, say, the suppression of speech on various platforms, how big tech was in cahoots with the White House during the Biden administration. It felt like voting for Trump was more promoting the free speech rights of Americans than voting the other side of the aisle. So, and that's also a big, that's a big issue for Hollywood, is free speech rights,
Yeah.
and the right of creative expression, individual creative expression. It's incredible how all this stuff is flip-flopped. So, I don't know. Is the average Trump voter somebody who used to be a Democrat, back in the 90s? I mean, we know Trump was a Democrat back in the 90s. So
Yes, he
it's
was.
a strange scenario. Now, I will say one of the things that's very important to keep in mind is that, the 2008 financial crisis, I think, created a real disturbing view of the system that doesn't work for a majority of people. And that was the foundation of Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. And if you look at the horseshoe effect of extreme left or right politics, they do meet in the middle, on the backside of that horseshoe. And you did see Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party have the same grievances. And most of those grievances were populist driven grievances. And that's where I really believe the MAGA movement came from. It was, hey, this is our system. It's a system by the people for the people, but it's not working for the people. How do we get back to that? How do we create a fairness of free markets, not crony capitalism? How do we avoid bailouts? How do we avoid things that have created highs and lows in the economy that have essentially decimated jobs and put people into financial turmoil for generations? All of that was stuff that led me towards this idea that, yes, Donald Trump, whether you like him as an individual or not, you think he's a little too blunt and abrupt or disrespectful, whatever it is, he also symbolized this idea of possibly blowing up some of the corrupt parts of the system and replacing them with something better. Now, we can argue whether that's been happening in the first year, but that was the way I looked at that vote.
Well, I think that is in just a very interesting and fascinating way. It's a very analytical, logical way to assess the candidates. And I, frankly, my prayer is that everybody does that in a very logical, analytical way in assessing where the candidates stand, so that they make choices based on that as opposed to maybe feelings. Which brings me back to, I mean, most of our audience is faith-based, and I would love to hear how your faith has played into, I mean, you're such an expert on this issue with China. How has your faith played into what you've been doing with Hollywood and China and your book and the insights that you have on current political events?
Well, I would say just overall, this idea of believing in something higher and having faith in something that actually is principled and lays out guidelines of how to live your life is really important. But it also creates a connection and a community in a humanity that is dividing further and further by the day. The idea of going to church and being part of that community is a human touch point that everybody has forgotten the art of. And I like the fact that faith has sort of almost forced people to do it at least on a weekly basis and reminded them of the importance of talking to each other and caring about each other and helping each other in times of needs, or congratulating each other in times of celebration. So it's a very important part of my life. And then on top of it, the movies that I've been involved with, the movies that we're creating, for instance, at a company, Loam Entertainment out of Nashville, that I work very closely with, are ones that are, we could call them maybe faith adjacent, but are movies that aren't red or blue. They're for all Americans, and they provide this idea through the emotional core of the stories that we're telling to think about things at the end of the movie or at the end of the television series and make you want to rise to something greater, to do something greater with your life, to reach out and be a better person. And that's something that I think is really important, and something that's been lost with people's losing faith.
I love that, Chris, which makes me think back to the podcast that you and your wife are doing. So how did that even come to be? What made you guys decide to do that? How long have you been doing it? Tell me about this part of your life.
Well, yes. Once again, it's called Plate and Ponder, Empty Nesting with Jen and Chris Fenton. We empty nested with our two kids going to college. They're twins in the fall. And we decided we needed to find a hobby to fill some extra time that we had in our hands. And I told Jen that I didn't want to be, and we've been married happily for 21 years. So obviously we've had highs and lows like everybody, and we've gone through, faith has gotten us through tough times and has made us stronger as a couple and a strong family unit. But we didn't want to just go play pickleball. We didn't want to go play mahjong or, Chinese checkers or whatever it was. And Jen was like, look, you have this great niche sort of expertise. You've always complained about the fact that, like, your following has always remained at X amount or whatever it is. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's because that part of society that cares about what I talk about is niche. And that's sort of the basis of why that following is what it is. I still get invited to all this stuff and I still talk about it, but people do glaze over sometimes when you talk about US-China issues or the media business or things that are important in those spaces. She's like, well, why don't we just have great couple banter as 21-year married couple about different headlines that are in the zeitgeist and different things that people are talking about. And we'll have a lot of fun doing it. And we'll do it over dinner with wine. And we'll do it 3 times a week for 35 minutes, because any more than that, people get sick of you.
So this was her.
Yeah. And then you can bring in some of those important subjects for a few minutes every episode, so that people get that, involuntary, in their system. They start to think about it a little more, and they're entertaining and having a good time listening to us about, a lot of things that they're talking about too.
I think that that is amazing. And I'm so glad that she thought of this and encouraged it. It sounds to me like an inspiration from the Lord myself, because it's the perfect thing for you guys to do on many levels. You get to be together as a couple. She gets to join more with your work that you've done before, and you guys get to help support married couples who've been married any length of time, but especially more long-term is more difficult, and tying in your topics. I think it's perfect. And so tell me again the name of your show one more time.
Yeah, it's called Plate and Ponder, Empty Nesting with Jen and Chris Fenton.
Okay, and you said on every social media platform. So I know
it's on Apple, Spotify, etc.
Awesome. And then before we wrap up, if you could tell us your final thoughts on what my audience needs to know about the China situation, whether it's in Hollywood or any other area that you're an expert on now, and what we can do to protect our nation, protect our families. Give us some final insight.
One simple thing to do is in the morning when you wake up, and everybody sort of engages in whatever information source they have. They want to know a little bit about what's going on. Oh, what happened overnight in their town? What's the weather going to be, etc. One thing that's interesting to do is just type in the word China into your Google search or whatever your search engine is and press the thing up at the top that says news, and just see every morning, say the 6 headlines that are talking about China, and just read the headlines, and just go, oh, I didn't realize that was a China thing. I didn't realize China was involved in that. I didn't know about that. Oh, that one I knew, whatever it is. And maybe one of those headlines catches your attention. You read it a little deeper, but you do that for a month or so, you're going to start to realize how China is involved in every aspect of your day. And it'll just give you a little more of a very sort of brief, over 30 to 60 seconds every morning, a little understanding of where China sits on things.
I think that is perfect. And I also, on my end, encourage everyone, as I always do, as you're reading through the news, if there's something that you see that resonates with your spirit, that this is not right, and this is not something that we the people want in the United States of America, then it's time to go into a spiritual warfare prayer mode and start commanding your angels and asking the Lord for help, so that way we can be fully protected. And news from all areas are great grounds for prayer, but especially China. So thank you again very much, Chris, for being here. I just have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I personally have been educated on so much that I was not aware of, and I'm grateful. And now I know how to proceed too on this. It's a critical topic because China is everywhere in the
Yep.
United States, and we need to know this.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Johanna who put us together, and looking forward to the next conversation.
Amen. Glad to have you back anytime. And to my audience, and by the way, shout out to C Spiker, Marla. We had many people in chat. I was so engrossed in the conversation, folks, I forgot to shout out to you. So my apologies. But until next time, this is the Lynn Scott Hagerman podcast, where light is breaking through and the truth is rising, and so are we. Praise God.
Light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call.